Okay.
We're good. We're all good.
All right. Well, I will call to order the May 5th, 2021 meeting of the Aspen-Pitkin County Housing Authority. City, please take the roll.
Okay. Carson?
Here.
Kelly? Kelly?
Here.
Rick?
Here.
Rachel?
Here.
John?
Present.
David, I don't think is here. And Francie, I don't think is here. And Skippy is not here. So that's it.
Great. All right. So now we'll move into public comment. We've got a 3-minute time limit. So I see David's iPad. We're go ahead and please identify yourself for the record and go ahead.
Okay, hi, APCHA board. Thank you for taking time to hear our concerns today. I am David Vantine. This is my wife, Lisa Vantine. We'd like to thank you for the opportunity to live and work in this wonderful valley for all of these years. Lisa and I are both trying to be proactive about our retirement plans. We spoke with Bethany Spitz about the issue, and she suggested we attend this meeting and encourage us to write this letter. We would like to share our story. In 1992, we were offered full-time positions, Lisa at Aspen Valley Hospital, Radiology Department, and myself at Aspen City Market. We lived at Mountain Oaks, A.P.C.H.A employee housing, for 5.5 years, and at that time we were informed that the hospital was allotting 6 years to employees for this housing. We wanted to stay in the valley, we just had to find a way to make it happen. Our friends and co-workers said we should put our name in the lottery for A.P.C.H.A housing. We filled out the paperwork and waited for something to become available. Knowing our chances were slim, we kept looking for any way to stay in this amazing valley. With the clock tipping, we took a road trip to Whitefish, Montana, near Big Mountain Ski Resort. By pure luck, we found a 2-bed, 2-bath ranch style home on 5 acres for $90,000. This was late 1997. So we had a lot to think about on our way back to Aspen. When we got back, our friends told us that A.P.C.H.A had a lottery for Highlands Villas. We put our name in. And how ironic, we both graduated from Highlands High School in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. During the 2-week bid time, we joined our friends on a hut trip. We wanted to tell them with very heavy heart that we were probably going to purchase the property in Whitefish. We had 6 months to find housing, and we knew it was unlikely we would win the Highlands Villas lottery. Upon returning from the hut, we received a message from A.P.C.H.A. We had won. We gladly passed on the Whitefish property. We are coming up on 30 years of working and living in Aspen. Turning 60 means we have dedicated half our lives to this wonderful community. For 25 years, we called Highlands Villas number 3 our home. Unable to have children of our own, we have been fortunate to watch 2 generations of great kids grow up at the villas. We are truly blessed. We call ourselves weekend warriors because we decide to work weekends so our coworkers could spend the weekends with their families. Even though we missed every wedding, graduation, and everything that happens on weekends. Since we could not have children, it was the right thing to do. I've worked at the market for 25 years. I've dealt with the everyday stresses of that job. No matter how crazy of the day, I always had a big smile and friendly chat for locals and tourists. For the past 5 years, I've been a lift operator at Aspen Highlands, working weekends, and still the same smile and try to do the friendly chat for all the riders. Lisa is a licensed, if I may receive my time to Lisa. This is her part. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Did you get all that?
Yes.
We're good? Okay.
Go ahead.
I am a licensed radiology, CT, MRI, and mammo technologist. My job is both mentally and physically challenging. I save lives. That's what I do. If any of you have needed our services on the weekend, it probably looks like organized chaos. I've moved patients, stretchers, heavy X-ray machinery. In the operating room, I run the C-arm while wearing a heavy lead apron. I comfort and care for every age of patient and every type of injury and illness imaginable. I have compassion and a smile for every one of them. Aspen Valley Hospital and Aspen City Market asked us to come work in this community 30 years ago. We left our families friends, and good jobs. We also left our dog. He was not allowed at Mountain Oaks. He stayed with my mother. All we had was each other. We still do. We just have each other. Everyone said we would be back in 6 months. Thankfully, APCHA was created 40 years ago. As we all know, the workforce that has sustained this community is aging. We would appreciate it if APCHA could take some time to reevaluate its retirement policy. Can we please start this truly relevant conversation? When COVID-19 hit, we started seeing the world a little differently. We were getting older. We were losing close friends and family members. 5 in the last month to cancer, old age, COVID, and unfortunately suicide. 2020 took its toll on all of us. Thank you so much for listening and trying to understand it from our perspective. Feel free to contact us with any questions. Does that make sense?
Thank you, David and Lisa. Was there a specific policy that you were asking for to be addressed?
Yes. So we moved here. I was 29. He was 31. So we are approaching 60. And Bethany said we have to work to our full retirement age, which is 67. That's 7 more years. I don't know if I can do my job 7 more years. It's very stressful. It's very physical. His is very physical, obviously, with what he does. And we feel that it's half our lives. If we can obviously take retirement early at 62, I believe, and collect some of our unemployment.
Not unemployment.
Not unemployment. Social Security.
Yes.
You know, I know full retirement age is 67, but if we wait till 67, I will have worked 30. We both would have worked 38 years here in this valley, which seems a little crazy. Most places you can retire at 25, 30 years. We're just asking for maybe a little consideration of, you know, if someone comes here in this valley and at age 55 buys their unit, they're working, you know, say they're 55, they're working until they're 67 and can keep their unit. We've been here 30 years, and we still have to work 7 more. We don't know if we have that in us, and we want to stay in this valley.
And we're just trying, as we said, we're trying to be proactive about our retirement. And to be honest, we never really expected, as we said, we never expected to live half of our life in this
valley. We've been so
valley.
lucky, and APCHA's been wonderful.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But we just don't know what to do now. We don't want to leave, but I don't know if we can keep the pace. There's no even part-time. I was told we can't even go to part-time after 30 years.
Well, thank you so much for your comments and for coming before the board. I think I'll turn it over to Rachel. I think Rachel has a comment.
Yes, thank you, Carson, and thank you both for calling in. I really appreciate it, and I can truly empathize. I moved here in 1978, and I turned 60 this year, and I have another 8 years to work before I can retire my unit. And I understand that was the bargain I made when I moved in. And I, unfortunately, have had so much history in housing and the local government that I know the subsidies that went into all the units that are out there, whether it was growth subsidies or other subsidies. And so we're all kind of living in subsidized units. And those units are subsidized for a workforce with a retirement age at full Social Security. And this question has come up before. I recall literally city police officers asking, could they retire in their city-owned housing at 60 or 55, and they'd work 30 years. But that's just not the bargain our community has made when we're taxing ourselves so heavily to create affordable housing. And the other side of the story, of course, is this board hears regularly from people who believe there should be no retirement whatsoever in units, and that once you've stopped working, you should be forced to sell and move wherever you can. And so we've held strong on saying, yes, there should be a retirement policy, and people who've dedicated their working lives to this community should be able to retire in their units. But we have not looked at lowering that age because there is so much demand, and currently, again, unfortunately, you know, I know hard blue collar workers and doing physical labor like you do it. I work at City Market part-time myself right now, so I know what you're talking about. And we don't necessarily have that longer life expectancy that others do, but we've always gauged our program on full Social Security retirement age. And again, there's a lot of people who'd like to see that change, and a lot of people who'd like to say no retiring in your units. They need to go to a new worker. Wow. So we're just balancing it right in the middle.
How about part-time? Anything part?
You know, 1,500 hours a year is relatively part-time. It's a 30-hour week. It's not a full-time week. 15, you know, if you were 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, it'd be a 2,000-hour a year requirement. But, you know, I'm not the full board. I'm just responding with the history that I can give you and what, again, our board has faced in terms of demand for those units.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for.
We understand. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if I can make it another 8 years either.
Oh my. Yeah. Well, like I said, we're just trying to be proactive. We want to make sure we have our ducks in a row, and you know, just.
And unfortunately, try to maybe enjoy the rest of our lives we have together. You know, X-ray techs don't live very long because we get radiated forever. So we just might have to, unfortunately, find something else, I guess.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Can we?
I guess that clarifies that. Yeah.
That clarifies that.
Well, thanks for your comments. Are there any other? Is there any other public comment?
Could I ask one more question?
It's not for questions.
Very quickly.
Carson, it's not for questions. We can't take questions during public comment.
Okay.
Okay.
So, would it be okay if I just said two things? One is, if you'd like to send your letter, I know you've been talking to Bethany, and if you want to send your letter to her, she can include it. She can give it to Maddie. We can include that in the public record. Okay. And also, I do want to clarify that Rachel, at the end of what she said she was just giving you the history, and she's one board member, so she wanted to share that with you. What she said does not determine what the board might do in the future. And okay. And so I think it's good that you came on. The board heard you, and the board is looking at different elements of the regulations. And I can't tell you that the retirement age is coming up anytime soon, but typically what you would see is that the board would take that into consideration. And do know, like, you're able, and I'm just explaining this because it seemed like you're a little bit new to this, so I wanted to make sure you understood. Like, you can come on and share these thoughts any time for any APCHA meeting you want to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening.
Yes,
we appreciate it.
Thanks.
We appreciate all the work you guys are doing.
Yes.
Can I just
Kelly.
make a comment before you leave us? I would just note too, you know, we do have a running list of topics for future discussion. In that list, there's sort of retirement work history is one of those. So it's been flagged for the board already. It's on page 3 of our agenda. And I would just note for maybe staff and the rest of the board, we might want to like split those other topics out. There's kind of a bunch crammed into that first line, but so we'll continue to revisit this and decide whether it becomes a priority for policy conversation in the future.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Is there any other public comment? Okay. Hearing none, we will close the public comment portion of the meeting. And let's see.
Exec session.
executive session. Yeah, I've got the old agenda on here. So does someone want to make a motion to move into executive session? And I believe, Diane, with that motion, we also wanted to add Jim and...
Yeah, so Carson, what can happen is Kelly can make the motion, then I'll read the statement that Tom normally reads.
Great.
And I'll actually then list the folks who we would request that that the board invite into executive session. Thanks.
So I'll go ahead and make a motion for the board to enter in executive session for the purposes of discussion pursuant to Colorado Revised Statutes 24-6-4024B, a conference with the authority's attorney for the purpose of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions, and pursuant to that same statute, Section E, determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators. The specific items of discussion involve A.P.C.H.A v. Mulcahy, 2015 CV 3150, A.P.C.H.A v. Mulcahy, 2021 CV 3000, and Mulcahy v. A.P.C.H.A 18-CV 01918.
And Mr. Chairman, staff is requesting that the board go into executive session pursuant to CRS 24-6-402, subparagraph 4B, conference with authorities for the purpose of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions, and subsection E, determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations. Actually, Kelly already read that, so I'll add, I will continue to read it. Developing strategy for negotiations and instructing negotiators. Specific items of discussion involve A.P.C.H.A v. Mulcahy, 2015 CV 3150, A.P.C.H.A v. Mulcahy, 2021 CV 3000, and Mulcahy v. A.P.C.H.A 18-CV-01918, and other potential or existing litigations or appeals involving Lee and Sandy Mulcahy. If the board votes to go into executive session, the executive session will be recorded, and the recording will be maintained by staff for a period of not less than 90 days. Staff would also like to request that you invite into the executive session Ben Johnson, who has been retained as an attorney for the board in the matters that are to be addressed, and James R. True, Aspen City Attorney, who is familiar with the matters to be addressed, and Phyllis Mattice, Deputy County Manager, as well as A.P.C.H.A staff. Thank you. And sorry I interrupted your motion.
I'll second.
Roll call.
We have a motion and a second. Cindy, go ahead with the roll, please.
Okay.
Or with the vote.
Okay. Rick?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Rachel?
Yes.
Carson?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Is that it? Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
Give us a few
minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes before we can start.
Executive Director's comments and staff update from Diane.
Yes. I will not share my screen because I only have one slide for Executive Director update, and that is specifically around the recruitment. Our recruiter is talking this week to 8 people who look pretty good, and that's kind of, and Phyllis and I talked a little bit about today about we're trying to see if we can come up with some options for housing that has been a barrier in the process. It's been a concern. So we're working on that, and we'll keep you updated. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
Hey, I have a quick question, Diane. With the new Colorado employment law,
Equal work.
yes. What does our listing look like? What's the salary range we're listed at?
Our salary range, I don't know, I can't remember the range off the top of my head, but I believe it's 126 to 149 something. I call it 150 because it's pretty close to that.
Okay. Thank you.
And actually, I will send out the, I will resend to all of you the position profile just in case you know some folks. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, next item is the consent calendar. I'll accept a motion to approve the minutes of the April 21st regular meeting.
I move to approve the minutes of April 12th, 2021 regular meeting.
April 21st.
April 21st.
Yep. Got a motion from Rick, second from Kelly. Any corrections? Cindy, please take the vote.
Okay, John?
Yes.
Rachel?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Carson?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Moving along, we've got the proposed amendments to the land use code from Chris Bendon and Ben Anderson. So Chris and Ben, I don't know who wants to take it, but the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and APCHA's board. Good to be with you again. Wasn't very long since we last talked. Ben Anderson from City Community Development. And, I think our presentations to you both a couple weeks ago and tonight are really for information purposes for you. Certainly, we're here to answer questions and, take any comments back to City Council for their consideration as they're deliberating this. But we've had these code amendments. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we talked with you about some amendments to growth management, chapters of the land use code, some improvements to the Affordable Housing Credits Program. This is another amendment. Chris is going to do most of the presentation this evening. This is a little bit interesting in that, typically when we do amendments to the land use code, it's being pursued by City Council or City staff is kind of initiating the amendment. In this case, Mr. Bendon is representing a property owner who is proposing an amendment. The land use code does allow that process. Really the only difference in terms of process that's there is that they have to ask City Council if they can even apply to do so. City Council allowed them to apply. And now the amendment is going through our amendment process just as any other amendment. Chris will fill in some more of the details, but essentially this involves a very small change. I think it's 5 or 6 words to 2 zone districts, the RMF and RMFA zone districts, residential multifamily. These areas are scattered throughout town, but the real focus of these areas is the neighborhood just to the east of downtown, kind of between downtown and the river. It's a zone district that's been identified as residential multifamily since 1964. And it's clearly a zone district that's given incentive to the development of more dense multifamily developments. It's our only purely residential zone district that has residential multifamily as a permitted use. And anyway, I'll let Chris fill you in on some of the details of how this would work and why this is in front of, why we brought this to APCHA for, your thinking about it. I will say that one of the issues that's involved with kind of peripherally to this topic that I do want to put on APCHA's radar, because it relates to several other issues that community development is thinking about and city council is thinking about, is the presence of on-site affordable housing in multifamily development. And, I think APCHA has had, different perspectives on site as kind of a preferred mitigation requirement over the years. I think it has applications to this particular code amendment in the residential, in the RMF zone district, but just multifamily housing in general, and the regulations that we have in the land use code, this question of on-site as we make some potential future policy changes and regulatory changes in the land use code, I think is something that community development APCHA is going to need to work on a little bit to make sure that we're on the same page and not working in opposite directions of each other. So with that, I'm certainly here at the end of Chris's presentation to answer any questions that you might have. Cindy and Diane have generously given us 30 minutes on your agenda. Again, promise to keep to that 30 minutes, and happy to answer any questions after Chris's presentation.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Chris Bendon with Bendon Adams here on behalf of the applicant. I think Ben covered the explanation pretty well. We have a client with a property in the RMF zone district that is sub 6,000 square feet. It's smaller than 6,000 square feet, which only allows us to do a single-family home. It has a small single-family home on it now, and our client could basically draw up plans, drop them in for the building department, and get going. And so after I got done scratching my head as to why it is he was interested in developing multifamily housing, walked him through all the mitigation, sent him videotapes of the 1020 East Cooper hearings. I still wants to proceed. So, I think there is, an opportunity there for additional residential development. Obviously, it'd be a combination of free market and affordable. As Ben had mentioned, the code currently sort of is agnostic on whether that affordable housing is on-site or off-site. Our client is interested in doing it on-site, but not all people would be, but our client is. We have applied for a code amendment to the city. We have shared information with interested parties. We did a mailer out to everyone in the zone district, some 1,900 people or so, owners. Had a meeting with the Planning and Zoning Commission a week ago, and all that information is kind of heading towards City Council. So I can share much more, maps and analysis that we've done. Clearly, multifamily housing, as you would imagine, would be bigger and more impactful than a single-family home. So it's the heights are allowed are 32 feet as opposed to 25 for a home. Floor area is much more, and you would expect, there's going to be more people, there's going to be more cars, there's going to be more kids running around screaming and yelling, and all the things that come along with folks living on site. But that's in comparison to a single-family home that I would expect would be a second home. Just given its location and the market and the investment that would happen. I mean, just the dirt alone is a sort of a steep challenge. Not guaranteed, certainly. I mean, someone could build and live here full time and work here, or not work here, but be here full time. But it's probably in the category of second home. And this would provide an opportunity, at least for a portion of the property, to be, more active than that. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions, share with you slides on our analysis of the physics of the thing, of the mitigation, requirements, all of that.
Well, thank you. Looks like John has a question, and then Rick.
Hey, Chris. What's the difference in square footage that can be built on the site? How do you handle parking? In multifamily, when you say multifamily, is it a triplex instead of a duplex or a single family home? I mean, what do we turn multifamily into? And how, I mean, to me, there's lots of constraints just by the size of a lot. And how do you handle some of those responsibilities inside that lot?
Yeah. So, I'll give you an example of a lot that's 4,500 square feet. So we did sort of a breakout for, multiple different sizes, but that's sort of in the middle of, 3,000 to 6,000. So it would allow for a home of 2,256 square feet of floor area. Obviously you can get to almost double that with garage and basement space, but that's a free market home. For a multifamily, there's not one answer because you get more floor area the more dense the property is. So the more units you put there, the more floor area you get. And I would expect you probably start to hit the limits of what you can do with probably 5 units, because you just start running out of places to put everything. But in that scenario, you get, let's see, 500, 3, you get about 6,000 square feet of floor area, plus, basement space. Parking, we're not asking for any changes in the parking code, but the parking, depending on where you are, you can provide either on-site or through cash and lieu. And that's part of a review that the project would go through. Areas that are kind of on the periphery of town, Hunter Creek area and so on, there's a higher requirement for on-site parking. And parking is certainly something that we've heard a lot about, as Ben can probably attest to.
John, the only thing else I would say is in the zone district that kind of this code change simply allows existing dimensional requirements for the zone district to be applied to lots that are less than 6,000 in a clear fashion. This encouragement for multifamily, has been in place, I think, since 2004. So 17 years, I think, we've had this up to 1.5 FAR, encouraging multifamily, the additional height, and also a discouragement of single family and giving a floor area penalty for the building of new single family in the zone district. So, from staff's view, something that we're proposing, but
I'm still wondering about multifamily because is multifamily a single family house with a mother-in-law unit, or is multifamily?
It would have to be at least 3 units, and these are not ADUs. That they're actual units that are regulated by APCHA, either as a rental or a sale, but are in the full domain of APCHA.
Okay.
John, you got to realize, I think there's only 24 properties left out there to be developed under these scenarios on residential multifamily. Is that correct?
It is correct. There's 24 that are sub 6,000 square feet. I wouldn't say that they're all I guess technically they're available for development, but someone would have to want to come in and develop. And, many of those are built out with someone who's probably perfectly happy with what they have. So, the city's not going to get 24 applications. If this goes through, we should expect that there will be at least one application from our client. But I don't know if anyone else is going to be, wanting to come in.
Well, this is awfully nice of you, Chris, and your client to run interference for all 24 potential RMF owners. Very nice.
Rachel, you're on mute.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris and Ben, for making the presentation. The one thing I haven't seen and it's going to come to our table. So I don't know. I need to stay out of if there is a vote to offer support or anything like that later in this meeting. But is it going to deal with this problem we've had with affordable housing units in a multifamily building that then get priced out because they can't afford the same HOA and upkeep that the free market units demand? And, there was one over there by Coke Park. It was a, scattered site. People would buy them for mitigation. But then eventually the other owners on the free market decide to gold plate the building, and the special assessment's more than the cost of the unit. And so APCHA has had gone back and gotten permission from whoever created the unit, city or county, and then sold them as free market units and put the money back into the fund and started to create affordable housing where they could. So I'm just wondering if this ordinance is going to address that in any real way, because otherwise it just eventually fails.
Yeah, the change in the ordinance doesn't affect that at all. It does certainly compute into the discussion of whether the community prefers on-site housing that's intermingled with free market, or in standalone projects where there's a sort of more uniform set of expectations. I can tell you in more modern projects, there are some kind of those examples, and I remember that example over at Co-Lumber Park, not pretty. But the more modern projects have sort of that awareness built in, so that the approvals require that the HOA, there's actually two separate regimes, and then a master HOA, and the HOA dues are there's a ratio based on the valuation of from the assessor, so that you don't get blown up if the HOA gets together and says we want to do a snow melt driveway or something that's sort of routine for a free market property, but then you pass around a bill and everyone owes $40,000 and the affordable housing people just get blown up. So that was certainly something that I think both the city staff and APCHA staff are aware of, and there are models out there. I think Obermeyer, I remember that, working through that, making sure that the affordable residents there had sort of their own, HOA regime and wouldn't get blown up by, the gold plating example that you brought up.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. I have heard real concerns from many of my neighbors here at Hunter Creek, where 2/3 of the project is free market, and they are trying to buff it out like no tomorrow, and that's the Commons Board, but we don't have any ratio. So we're paying the same HOA dues for the improvements that they get to see increase their property value by $50,000, but we don't, because we're appreciation capped, but we're still paying for that improvement, and it's really a bad pickle. Thank you.
And Rachel, I would just add, I think it's a larger policy question that I think both related to this specific potential amendment, and then some of the larger things that we're planning on doing around multifamily replacement. This is a crucial, I think, decision point as we put some policies in place. I will say, in this case, if Chris's, if the amendment passes, Chris's client brings a project, we do require a review with Planning and Zoning Commission for the issuance of the allotments. And I do believe that those kinds of conditions around, condo declarations or kind of requirements of those kinds of things could be built in as conditions of in those Planning and Zoning Commission. I think that's the location for the requirement or how the affordable housing mitigation is being provided.
Okay, thank you.
Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Chris. Nice to see you.
See you.
I guess I would say thank you for that, for that additional information, because I was hopeful that there was a way to tease out some of the issues there. I think when you also think about, mixed multifamily with free market and deed restricted, whether it's a rental or whether it's a sale, can affect how those get structured as well. So I don't want to hang, I personally think that for a diverse community and a, diverse economy, that we should be housing people together, right? Like we should have opportunities for mixed incomes throughout the city. And, I think for best practices for equity, et cetera, it all bears out that that's a good thing to achieve. And so I would like to see policies that lead to that. And, the HOA policy seems a bit like a separate animal to deal with creatively and separately rather than hang up the ability to achieve that equity goal. So that's my thought on that. I would also, I guess, just say that my observations in our community and around the state are that with these type of projects, they're either government driven or they're from a mission driven developer, right? Like these aren't necessarily projects that anyone's looking to do because the math doesn't always pencil out, or quick math doesn't always pencil out. You need to have a bit of a long game sometimes on a return on your investment for these types of multi-family projects to look desirable to developers. So I don't see the fear that 24 applications are going to come in right away on this, that you would see that in the city. And I guess those are just some of my thoughts right now.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. I think we've heard from everybody, but David, do you have anything to add? Nope, nothing from David. And, I'll just throw in my comments. I'm fully supportive of this. I think, I think more multifamily housing is a good thing. I think, less, more vitality and less second homes is, I think, sort of indirectly helps APCHA. So I'm supportive of it. I don't know, Diane, are you looking for a vote? Or are you looking for just sort of general direction? What's sort of our final goal here?
Ben, I think that question's for you. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's really up to the board. I think our primary purpose was to just inform you that this is being proposed. City Council is going to be considering it. We think it has some interaction with some things that APCHA is interested in. I will say that, the public comment that we have received around this has been fairly one-sided. And so if you so choose, and if there's interest in doing so, and, giving a formal, thumbs up from APCHA about this, I think it would be a good message, to convey with the proposal. But that's certainly not required by our process, yeah. and we were more here for kind of informational purposes this evening.
All right.
Carson,
can I jump in with an additional comment that I forgot to say? I knew there was something else. I was thinking in some of these projects where there are significant concerns related to like storage and parking. I just wonder if maybe like some senior housing would be a better fit. And just something to like keep in your mind if that's a potential partnership opportunity where, we've been having broad discussions at APCHA about how do we do some sort of trade down or something for senior housing. But, I just don't think we're going to see like multitudes of bicycles and kayaks and things on decks, that people raise concerns about with senior housing that you might with family, young families. So just a thought if it becomes an idea if these projects get stuck in certain places.
Okay. So I guess if we're going to, does anyone want to suggest? I don't know if is it a non-binding resolution, or how do we want to do this, or what's the board's feeling here?
I'm generally in favor of this ordinance.
Carson?
Rachel, you can't comment. Cindy, go ahead.
For any land use reviews, we usually do ask for referrals, and staff has been doing the referrals because we can't take them to the board anymore, but we could take this to the board. I can work up something just a short little paragraph that states that overall the board is in support of this, of the ordinance. Just to make sure that we're covered for if it's affordable housing and it's mixed, that we do have that caveat in place that states that if homeowners' dues are treated as the assessed value of the free market versus the deed restricted housing, just like what Chris said. We do have that language, and I believe it's actually also in we require that in past memos. So that language can be added in there as well, just so that we know that we're covered as well. I can put something together and provide that to Ben and to Chris to look over and see if it meets what you guys agree that's okay to move forward with.
Great. Well, I think we've got a consensus on that. So let's do that, and then that would just come back at the next meeting.
Well, I know they're going to City Council next week.
Oh, okay, great. Well, then I think then that's I think we're good. I mean, I think you've heard what everybody has to say, and
yeah,
I think.
Carson, if I could just interject, there will be a second reading. So if this board wanted to be sure that they feel very comfortable with the language, they can see it before that second reading. And you don't have to send it sight unseen. That's never a good idea in my mind. And then secondly, I just want to say to Chris, I have planned a vacation. I'm going to be out of town, what is scheduled as the second reading now. And I have expressed to my staff that I'd like to be there for it. But other than that, it's really, I don't think they're changing the schedule. Other than that, it's really up to the applicant to decide, do they want to be heard by a 4-person board or ask for a continuance or go forward. So just a heads up. I'm going to
good.
Hawaii.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, it's about time.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for the intel. That's good. And I certainly appreciate the conversation and support from the board, and I think this will be meaningful for the conversation with City Council. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Ben.
Mr. Chair, before I leave you, I want to make a plug for a book.
All right.
This is a book hot off the press. Rachel knows about this book. The title is Aspen and the American Dream. It's published by University of California Press. It's written by a sociologist named Jenny Stuber. And the subtitle, and basically the argument of the book is Aspen couldn't be Aspen and be a normally functioning town without our affordable housing program.
Cool.
But it says how one town manages inequality in the era of super gentrification. And compelling title. But anyway, really interesting read so far. We've got a couple copies up here on the 3rd floor. But I think talks about some of the issues that you folks are all very, very interested in. And I think it just came off the presses late last week. So
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Okay. All right. So then we will move on to continue discussion of standards for sellers to obtain maximum sales price.
I've got that one, and Mr. Chair, I'll say first and foremost, you did an excellent job of getting us back on track, so thank you. And if anyone wants the other copy that's available on Amazon, I just bought the last one of 2 that are in stock, so go now. Alrighty. Let me share my screen. Let me make sure I get the right one. Policy interim executive director comment. So, yes.
Totally.
Okay. Great.
Diane,
What are yes.
I would recommend turning off your video. You're skipping out, so.
Oh, great. Okay, I will turn my video off. Right. Is that any better?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. I'm just going to try to get a few more of you on my screen here. Great. So what I'm going to do tonight is take a little bit of a process perspective. And I'm going to first go through and just state the three kind of high-level recommendations, and then go in and talk about how you want to tackle this. The reason I want to do this is, as you know, this is a big, hairy, audacious opportunity that we're looking at tackling. And if we don't talk about process first, we could get mired in this quite literally for months or more. So with your permission, I'll start with just, as you saw, the first recommendation is to follow what John Ward and the board talked about last week, which was update the APCHA regulations now. Now, the other piece of information, and I do, this is a mea culpa on my part. I learned a lot in the past week. We've done a number of meetings, kind of more detailed meetings with staff, and knowing now that most buyers, more of them actually hire an inspector, and then some of them will use a friend of theirs. So we are recommending that we update the APCHA regulations now. I will tell you, based on the discussion today, this is kind of how much, when we get into the detail, things shift. Cindy recognized today that we should actually do the inspection when the seller decides they want to sell, because then we'll know up front how much either we're going to take out of the seller's proceeds or we're going to add to the maximum property price. And if anything's going to be added to the sales price, and we want the buyer to know that as they're getting their financing done and as we advertise the property. So that's kind of an update just today. And then also, we do recommend, and we'll discuss this in a little bit. I want to just run through the recommendations first, if that's okay. And then we do want to update the regulations because the RO properties don't always come through us. So making that a regulation where possible. The second one is, within the next 3 months, figure out if we can get this whole piece done on requiring the capital improvements to be done. For Rachel's question, we've really narrowed them down to true life safety elements. And then the third piece is ask staff to begin to work on a modified deed restriction. We actually had our first meeting to discuss this today, and it really informed the discussion. Things like maybe for carpet, we give people, if they've replaced their carpet, we give them full credit for it, because that's something that is not a capital improvement that needs to be required, but maybe an incentive that we could put in the future deed restriction. So my first question, and Carson, do you want me to, I guess we take questions from Rachel and John. I would like to continue to talk about process, but I guess, Rachel, do you want to go first? I think your hand was up first.
I'm sorry, that was an old hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, something.
Okay. Yeah, so I think it's a good idea on the inspection. APCHA has to hire the inspector. The inspector has to work, it has to work as the buyer's representative through the inspection of the unit, as far as, or APCHA's representative. The second thing is, and I was kind of going to save this for board member comments later, but I've been thinking about the whole program, and I think we got to turn it on its ear a little bit. And you know, the housing fund, I don't know what the balance is in that today. The transfer tax has to be significant. I'm sure it ballooned up in the last year, and it's going to balloon if there's enough properties to sell this summer. But to me, that's where we go. And APCHA ends up buying units, and we change our whole philosophy on the appreciation that units get. It's no longer I was going to save it, but it's no longer a 3% whatever or whatever people get. It's you get 1%. APCHA buys the units. They do the work on the units with the fund that, in my opinion, should have paid for APCHA and should pay for whatever we do here. And then we can ensure that units stay at a level of quality for the long term. I mean, it's 3,000 units. It's a waterfall. It's an avalanche of units that we're going to have to take care of. And I think I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off topic, but it's something that and there's other people that have good suggestions too, but I think you just turn the whole paradigm on its head. But
hold on, John. I want to understand what you're saying. So are you saying APCHA would do all the maintenance on the units? So you would have private ownership, and then as an owner, you would not be responsible for any maintenance.
You can choose to take care of your unit. Most people have chosen not to,
right, over
the course of time. But I think it's somebody gave me this or told me about the model. I think it's with the police housing. They get a level 1% appreciation cap. The city takes care of the maintenance on the properties, takes care of the flip or the turn or whatever it is. And so taking this entitlement essentially out of, I'm entitled to my appreciation. I don't care if you buy it or the next person buys it, I'm not doing anything to, all right, well, we cap the appreciation and we'll maintain these units because somebody's going to have to maintain them. Otherwise they're just going to fall down. Sorry, go ahead, Rachel. I'll stop talking.
Yeah, no. I really appreciate this because, and Diane would tell you, I wrote a fairly lengthy email to her after our last meeting with some concerns of, are we looking at the big picture? And I use the term tinkering around the edges because I really agree with what John's observations are, and I'm trying to find a way to create a visual about that. But it is awkward when we would be the ones saying, okay, you can have up to 3% appreciation a year, but we decide based on CPI that it's really averaged closer to 2%. We know you have a 4% mortgage, and at the end of the day, we're going to take that appreciation back from you based on our inspection and the wear and tear in the building. And so, it's like we give with one hand and we take away with the other. That's awkward to me. That's very awkward. And the other thing that I was trying to get to is, again, just pulling money numbers out of air. I'm not having a specific example, but say it costs $200,000 to build the $250,000, $300,000 to build the unit, no land costs, and then we sell it to someone for $185,000, and we're expecting them through their appreciation, which we cap, to be able to keep that in the same condition as if it was brand new, a $330,000 unit. And have we set up a structural deficit over time that no one would have seen play out until we got to closer to this point? And, coming from that, while still, highly conceptual, I was wondering if we shouldn't have something kind of like an appreciation bank where APCHA keeps the appreciation. And when someone comes in for a repair, they say, I'd like to use some of my appreciation up to redo the bathroom that's failing or whatever. But, rather than give them the appreciation to begin with and then say, now we're taking it back, isn't there a way to track the appreciation a unit would have or could have had and then be able to let people borrow against it before they sell? That's the other real problem we have, is no one can tap their appreciation until they sell. And so while you might have wanted to get that $10,000 and redo the bathroom, you can't. And other things are related to this whole, older program. But, even looking at that list with windows, that will work really well for single family homes. It doesn't work well in all condos when they have a 3-story window unit that is 3 different units and can't be replaced unless all 3 units are replacing them. And so, I've got mold growing inside underneath the sealant of the windows. They're so old that I can't spray anything on to kill the mold. These windows are leaking so badly. But until Hunter Creek decides to do a big redo, I can't do anything as an individual. But again, I think we have to look at the big picture right now. And the other thing, again, comes down to is capital improvements are very hard to make that qualify in a condo. If you have a single family home or a home that was designed to be able to put in a new wall for a bedroom, or you could do different things, right now in a condo, almost everything is just maintenance. It's not a capital improvement. It depreciates, and you don't get to add it to your base in any way, shape, or form. So I could totally repaint this unit, redo the carpeting, redo the kitchen flooring, and all of that's just maintenance. It doesn't add to your price. So there's challenges. We give some people capital improvements at 10%. Other people, they have a 10%, but they can't take advantage of it. And maybe we should fool with where that 10% is allowed as well. I'll leave it there, but I just really have to agree with John. It needs to be in the sales document of whoever buys a home, if this was to go forward, to say you may receive up to 3% of interest a year, but actually only CPI will be the limit. It's 3% or CPI. And at the end of your tenure, that can be reduced down to as low as 1% a year if you haven't kept your unit up to certain standards. And we will change those standards from time to time as the housing office sees fit, which is in your deed restriction. So we might tell them what we think it might be now, but they will be obligated to do what some board tells them they must do in 10 years. So these are some of the challenges with the program. Right. And we tried to offer the same benefits of free market ownership to people, but we don't. Yeah. And one last thing on John's other point, if we were using the city police model, you have to realize the real differences for those homeowners and why some maintenance is taken care of is they can't retire in their units, and they can't leave their units to their kids. And if they are fired or they find another job, they have to leave the unit. Whereas in a regular APCHA unit, if you got fired, you just have to find another job and fulfill your work commitments. So they don't have the same rights of ownership that other people within the system have. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to keep us from getting too deep into the weeds here. I mean, because obviously, lots of good conversation there, but those are some very, very, very significant, fundamental, and expensive changes that I don't think we're prepared to try and tackle today. So, I think I would like to sort of keep us to Diane's, suggestions. I think, I guess I'd maybe like to hear some input specifically on updating the APCHA regulations now to require inspection by an inspector that APCHA hires, and providing that inspection to the buyer, and then I guess I'd like to sort of keep it to this topic. I mean, John, I hear what you're saying, Rachel. I hear what you're saying as well, but I think we could literally talk about just everything you talked about just now for the next hour and get nowhere.
I apologize. I just saw the previous slide, and I thought we got to do
right.
It just
right.
me, so I apologize.
And I think long term, I think that's those are things we want to look at. So I guess what I would say is, so how does everybody feel about this sort of modified recommendation number one to say that APCHA pays for the inspection if the buyer opts to use one of the inspectors, which APCHA will contract. If the buyer opts to use another inspector, APCHA must okay the inspector. How does everybody feel about APCHA paying for paying for an inspection before the property is
real quick, Carson,
listed for sale.
I thought we were going to the point where Diane said, at the time that somebody says, hey, I want to sell my unit, that's when we were going to go get an inspection. So we don't even have a buyer identified at that point. So that's where we should have a list of qualified inspectors. They work for us. They work for the buyer. Is all I was getting at that point.
Right,
so
right.
That we get a third-party inspection essentially. So the owner goes out and hires one, and hey, don't overlook this.
Right.
Mind and whatever else.
So how does everybody? I guess is there anybody who disagrees with updating the regulations, having staff go back and draft a change to the regulations that would require prior to selling your home, APCHA would pay for an inspector to inspect on behalf of, I don't know if it's on behalf of the buyer, but to inspect the home in an objective manner.
I'm fully supportive, and I think that what you're really talking about is upon listing.
Prior to listing.
At the time of listing or before listing, so that we know what condition these are in. Right.
So everybody okay with that, Kelly?
Yeah, I'm really good with that. And yeah, we should do this immediately. But I do want to just be clear that I think part of the value in the information is before a listing price is decided. Like the timing needs to be such that, and like buyers are not bidding on something at a certain cost that they think, without having APCHA already weighed in on that, which is what I understand they were already doing up till COVID. We're doing some of those preliminary inspections to affect the listing price.
Right.
And so getting back to that practice, but codifying it as a requirement, I think is really an immediate need for sure.
I agree, and sort of hand in hand with that is this second point is to make the changes to the regulations that would require capital improvements if they were identified by the inspector, and then the list that's right there on page number 30 of the packet.
And then I would just also offer, I think this is an RFP. I'm not sure that APCHA creates a staff position for this, because I do think there is a bit of straddling here of we want that inspector to be objective and separate, so that's how I think we should proceed with this program.
Yeah, and so thank you, and thank you, Carson. So what we are talking about is that we update the regulations. APCHA pays, it's upon the listing, and APCHA will do an RFP to develop a pool of inspectors who are willing to do an inspection at a reasonable price, agreed upon price, and APCHA will create a process so we're going through that list and not using the same person all the time. And I will promise you that as we start doing this now, it's going to have a lot of benefit as we start into the conversation, Kelly, that you were just talking about as to how do we actually make the capital improvements.
Right.
I'd like to just pipe up here. I don't know if there is a licensed inspector program. I don't think you need to get a license to be an inspector. So I don't know what kind of criterion you're going to use to choose these inspectors, but there's no licensed program as far as I know.
Well, I do know that having recently bought a home, that staff has several that they've worked with, and I can tell you the one anecdotally, the one that I worked with, very professional, very thorough, and did an excellent job at what I think was a very fair price. So
yeah, no, I use them all the time, and they're great guys out there. But there is no program that licenses inspectors. So be cognizant of that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rick, and we'll do some research into that as well. Thanks.
All right, and then so the third point on this one is ask staff to begin work on a modified deed restriction that we can offer to property owners whose deed restrictions are not subject to changes in the regulation. So, I mean, I'm supportive of that. I guess I would ask for, is there anybody who disagrees with that? All right, great. So sounds like we've got some direction there. Diane?
Carson, can I ask, what will be the incentive for people to cash in their older deed restrictions for a newer deed restriction that will most likely cost them money?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, and that's something I think that the direction is to ask staff to begin work on this, and I think obviously you've got to provide some sort of a carrot for people to want to make these, to want to make these changes, and what that answer is, I frankly I don't know.
Yeah.
And Carson,
I'm sorry, it was a rhetorical question, but I think getting the deed restrictions right is so important with Burlingame 3 going to be coming online and 72 new homes selling. And I don't know the exact timeline, but I think we're going to need to get the APCHA sales office perhaps some temporary help, because at those time periods when a big project comes online like that, you tend to have a lot of movement within the system with people reselling their older units as well and moving up and moving around. So, we're really going to see a lot of activity coming forward, and having the right deed restriction going forward, whether it is just continuation of this current system or we're able to work out something better along John Ward's lines for those deed restrictions. But there's, at some point, a transition is going to need to happen, I think, and the new deed restrictions are looming for a lot of new units.
and Rachel, we realize that, and we are working on some possibilities that might be incentives for people to go under new deed restrictions. We're aware of that. We're aware that we need to try to be as, we really want to make it to where it's more of a carrot than for people to go under a new deed restriction than not. We also are aware that Burlingame 3 is coming online probably sometime in 2022 is our understanding and what we have been told. We've sold 80-something at one point in time, so I'm not too worried about those 72. I think we're pretty good at doing all that stuff. And but way before then, I'm hoping that we'll have an updated deed restriction that the board can say, yes, this will help, and it will be incentive for at least most of the people under deed restrictions that they would want to change it.
Cindy, she was suggesting you get an assistant. You should take it.
So thank you. That is perfect. The one that we're probably need to spend a little time on, and I think we're on a roll right now. It's worth starting into it. Is this idea that what is going to be the program for actually doing the capital improvements and paying for them, right? That's the hard part. And as I said, we've narrowed the list, and staff has reviewed this, and we spent time on this. And then I do want to quickly go to what we had talked about with as far as how we would do this. So we got through. Sorry, let me go to I want to go to the. I'm going to switch screens for a second and go to the staff report, or to the, sorry, a different name from a different community, policy memo. Let me do this real quick. So I do want to review with you. I think we can use the survey results as a way to start this discussion. We got through the inspector, and I'm actually going to skip how the cost of capital improvements should be estimated right now, because I think I think the big question is around who pays. And this was interesting to me because a number of you said the seller should pay. Sorry, I'm flying around here. So I think the next discussion would be around, staff has proposed the notion of a couple of different ways to approach this. You could go with the seller. One of the things, let me step back. One of the big problems here that you all know about is that next person who has to do those capital improvements may be doing capital improvements from somebody before them or before them. And I do want to share a perspective from staff. John, you said earlier that most people have not maintained their property. I do want to say staff's perspective, Pam, who works with the sellers and buyers, she said most people maintain their property, right? The 16 AJACs are not the norm. They're the outliers. Now, we're going to know more getting the home inspection reports, but I think if we operate under it's probably not as bad as we think it may be, and then you ask that question of then who pays. There is an initial problem with that initial seller, but you think about it, once you catch up, then it's probably less of an issue if there are any legacy issues. Staff suggestion at this point is that you set a floor for the seller. So the seller would pay up to what they bought the property for plus 0.5% appreciation. So the seller would get something. The seller wouldn't leave with nothing. And then anything remaining, any cost remaining would get added to the maximum resale price. That is one proposal. In talking to staff at one point, we talked through, and actually I had a conversation with an APCHA property owner who's looking at a property that needs a lot of capital improvements, and her suggestion was, for that first round, add it all to the maximum resale value, add it all to the sales price. Now that will result in a lot of escalation, but that would result in the properties quickly getting to a up-to-date capital. Thank you.
I do disagree with John's assumption that most people are not keeping up. I think that's a faulty assumption.
Well, I agree with you, but I was trying to paint a scary picture too. But
I just want to go backwards for half a second here. The one thing I don't want to create, which I think is odd, but can happen, is a disincentive for people to sell or move, especially in your older units. And you start thinking, wow, maybe I should just die here and let them carry me out on my shield, and somebody else can deal with that because I'm not going to take enough money out of this unit to move anywhere else. And I think that you're going to create a little bit of a perverse incentive to just stay there. If it's an older person in an older unit, there's that. The other thing that Diane hit on, which I think is really important, is, if you have a brand new unit, the first person who's in there for 8-10 years, it's going to be minimal. There's not going to be much that breaks or needs repair or anything like that. And the second person who gets in there, maybe not so much for them either, and they're going to get an inspection and everything's working fine still. But the third person who buys it, who now has 22-year-old fixtures and 22-year-old things, how much of the previous wear and tear is now credited to that third buyer? And the problem is we have fifth buyers out there in the market right now. We have people who bought a unit that is 40 or 50 years old, and they may have only owned it for 2 years, or they may have only owned it for 3 years. Now they're selling because they're getting a bigger place. They've moved. How do you deal with this length of residency, and what does your responsibility become based on your length of residency for inherited problems. And I hate to be the one who brings up the little issues, but they're real. And if we come up with a program where people can say, hey, that's actually not fair, we're going to be defending that program legally left and right, as people say, that's not what was in my deed restriction, or I didn't break that system. It was 30 years old boiler, and you want me to be the one to replace it, and I've only lived here 3 years. I have 10% responsibility for that boiler, not 100%.
Rachel, in that situation, just a heads up, that the model where the seller is only responsible up to, they can't lose money on the deal. So it would, in that situation, someone who had, let's say the cost of those repairs exceeded what their appreciation was in those 2 years, they would still get what they paid for the property plus 1%, 0.5% a year, and then we'd add the cost of the additional repairs onto the resale price.
You're on mute.
Rachel, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
I think part of the problem is we keep talking about straw man proposal, but we haven't played it out in numbers. We haven't played it out with any 3 or 4 examples to see how it really plays out. Because that person will have lost a lot more than that, Diane. They're already going to have a 2% sales commission fee, if not more. The board's talked about raising it. And they're going to have paid all their closing costs, to get into that unit to begin with. And I realize sometimes we all take a bath when you make a decision and you have to change. But again, how much of it are we selling someone a bad car and then asking them to make that car brand new for the next buyer? And this is the problem with applying something retroactively. When somebody says, but nobody made them replace the carpet when I moved in, I'm sorry to, again, be pointing out some of the challenges, but I think there's some real equity questions that we're just skipping over, and without putting this model to play in some real number examples, it's really hard for me to just sign on to.
And go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, I guess a couple of the things I'm reflecting on is that, I think we have an interest in the preservation of this housing. And I think we just have to acknowledge that interest is going to require some investment over time. Whether that is related to someone who didn't take care of their unit or didn't do the right percentage of maintenance on their unit over time, whether that is due to just escalating construction costs and the fact of how expensive it is when everyone's sharing the market for repair and materials and et cetera. Whether we run into situations like A.P.C.H.A, which, is, like just a terrible situation that nobody, foresees, or that the program doesn't necessarily prevent, but that we still have this interest in keeping units affordable and keeping them in our inventory for the most part. So, I think we sort of just have to own that interest and identify the programs that are going to let us preserve this housing, recognizing all these challenges. I think, Rachel, the fact that you said about the person who's owned a unit for 30 years and the cost for them, they could have kept it in perfect shape, and that still doesn't go away. That, their ability to sell that unit in perfect shape and buy a different unit or move elsewhere still doesn't go away, Like, that's just the nature of how, the appreciation and the investment market and et cetera have happened. And that's the case on the free market, too. For somebody who bought a house, in 1980 and have, not chosen to sell it in some markets. So, I just think those are a little bit of different issues that also have to be tackled, similarly to like what I suggested in a prior meeting where, we have these units that are, because of their low appreciation, are being sold at such a low cost, even though they're in the category, we also have units that if they're going to get if they're going to get all of the expended, the expenses of maintenance added on top of it, and therefore inflate it kind of above what that category maximum resale is, I think we are going to have to play a role in adjusting those prices, and whether that is similar to what John said about buying those units, either doing work or just adjusting those prices to reflect current conditions and then putting them on the market. That might be a role for APCHA to play, and that addresses broader problems than just this one. It does let us recognize that somebody didn't maintain their unit, and so the current buyer is saying, okay, we'll do all the repairs, but we want to recoup that over time. Okay, maybe that's okay. Maybe APCHA does it instead and keeps it at the same category price, or maybe we let that buyer do that, and then the next sale, we buy it and readjust the category price, and absorb some of those investments, I think, in different ways. So that's what I think we need to do, is just acknowledge we need to invest in these properties. Maybe what is the easiest way? What is what is the, most clearly explained way that to everyone in the system, what allows and creates equity, and then just identify, okay, this is what we want to do, and we have to figure out how to pay for it, because we're going to have to figure out how to pay for it anyway, if we continue to support our affordable housing program for the next 40 years. And keeping these units livable and maintained is way cheaper than having to build or replace units that come out of the inventory for whatever reason, because they just, fall apart or, have to be fully redone or something like that. So that's what I'm thinking about in a more broader picture, and how we engage in this topic of, maintenance of these units over time. And I just sort of also want to address, the criticism out there of APCHA, well, how do you not have standards to, hold sellers to these things? I mean, we're not breaking into people's houses to do inspections. We're not forcing people to let us in to show us what they have and what they don't have, even though we have a maintained interest in the inventory. So, we do need willing participation in a way, and we do need incentives in a way, and we do need sticks in a way, because those are all the things that I think are going to create the balance here. Those are my comments.
Good.
I'd just like to jump in real quick. I mean, I think it's important to remember too that we're talking about pretty fundamental problems with some of these units, right? And we've heard from Diane and Pam that the majority of owners are taking care of their properties. And Rachel, just to push back a little bit on the carpet example, we're not talking about carpet, right? We're talking about plumbing and electrical and leaks and mold. I mean, these are just sort of standard expectations that we would have. And so, what I guess I just want to be clear is that we're not talking about if you have been in your unit for 30 years and the kitchen has never been redone, that you're going to be responsible for updating the kitchen before you can sell, which I've personally heard that just from reading the paper, people have thought that's the direction we were heading. Very clearly, it's not. So just wanted to make that point.
Well, that goes to the whole, what are capital improvements, right? I mean, I live in a house that's 20 years old. I replaced a boiler last year. Right. That happens. You replace them. I'm going to replace a roof next year. That happens. That's part of owning a house. Right? And
it is. And the way that you address Rachel's concern, I think, about the person who's lived there for 30 years and the person who's lived there for a year, well, I'm fairly certain that when you do capital improvements on your property currently and you turn in all your receipts and say, this is the amount of money that I've spent, there is a depreciation based on, for if you do a refrigerator, the expected life is whatever. And so then that, they give you the value, but then I'm pretty sure, Cindy, jump in if I'm not correct here, but that it ticks down as you move through time. And so you could just sort of do the same thing. If you've got a water heater with a 10-year life expectancy, and or whatever, it needs to be replaced, and somebody's been there for a year, 10 years, they've been there a year, they're responsible for 10%. I mean, that's sort of how it would work in my mind.
Yeah. Can I jump in, Carson?
Go for it.
I mean, again, I'm sorry if I haven't explained myself well. I really agree with a lot of what you're saying and others are saying here. I'm just saying that, right now it's all very amorphous. We're not setting it down into these percentages, and it's not stated in a way that somebody might understand if they moved out in 3 years, what would be their obligation, or what would happen, what needs to go forward. The other thing I think has become very confusing is we started a long time ago talking about capital reserves, meaning HOA reserves for the larger complex or for the larger issues. We're now talking about capital for the livability standards and health and safety. And I think we need to start titling these very clearly differently. But the other thing, I'm just not sure there's not another shoe that's going to drop when we start saying, okay, well, how well funded is your HOA for this unit that someone's moving into? And will that person moving into that unit get a $5,000 special assessment because the HOA reserves are so bad? And at what point do we start saying to the seller, well, we need this much money to rebalance what should be in your HOA capital reserves for your roof, for your boilers, and this is how much for your livability standards, because the two will both determine whether that unit is still affordable and whether it will not be allowed to decay. So we've segregated them, and we're just talking about one set of things, and we're not talking about the other set of things, but I think the combined cost is going to start to be more than one might realize. And that's a little bit why I'm nervous about this. Otherwise, again, when you look at question 5, there's a little thing down at the bottom that says another entity should have. But with choice that was not in there was that there should be any public money or any contribution of public money, because there might, or a combination that might have been chosen by a few of us.
Rachel, I think our home trek data will inform on a rating system. All the HOAs will eventually be rated as to their financial health in the capital reserve area. So that eventually, I think, will shake out, and people have a good understanding of what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah, that's all I want them to know. Thank you.
Great point.
To address what Rachel's saying about it being to go back to the disincentive for, and Bethany brought this up today, Rachel. So you guys are on the same page. That knowing an inspection and having to pay for capital improvements could be a disincentive to selling. That's very real. One of the things we talked about as staff was that once we got in place a program for this, we probably want to offer a voluntary inspection program, because let's say you're an owner and you want to understand if depending on where we land, where the board lands on this, what your expectations or possible costs are going to be, or hey, should I do this upgrade now? I'm not planning on selling for 5 years. Would this be considered? Additionally, I want to let you know that we are looking at possibly changing the depreciation schedule on certain items to provide an incentive to those people who keep their homes in good shape, right? And give them, right, what you don't ever want to do in a program that you create is let a seller who's been, those few that have been neglectful, you don't want to let them off the hook. And on the flip side, you don't want to penalize those who've been, who kept up with their property. So I think one of the fundamental questions that kind of Rachel and John have put on the table is, do you want to move generally towards the seller paying something, or do you want to put this into the resale value and look at a buy down program at some point? Or the third option would be, as John initially put on the table, just put public money into this. Thank you.
Kelly?
Just following on that thought, thing, I just wonder, what if we try to focus this conversation on incentives? You know, what if we just try to tackle that and see how that starts to shake out, you know, in terms of examples with numbers, and look at, you know, what are the unintended consequences of providing incentives? Because again, I do think that, like, I personally just think we as, you know, policymakers, the broader community, the broader policy community, we're just going to accept, like, we are going to have to continue ongoing investment into this whole system. You know, like I can't see a path where that doesn't include that. So, you know, I just wonder if that would help us create ideas, you know, hone in on some real solutions that we can play out. What are the unintended consequences of those specific solutions that we might propose? You know, such as, okay, what if we do just tag it all on to the resale value, and how many times does that happen? And, you know, at what point would you say enough is enough? You know, let's be clear about the list that we would tag on. Would any of those not depreciate? You know, things like that might, I think, provide some more direction for us to start getting somewhere.
How are we going to pay for these incentives? Has anybody considered where those funds are going to come from?
I mean, I have. You know, there's a lot of money that's going to be on the table very soon for housing, and there's also a lot of current, you know, there are current programs in Department of Local Government that are for preservation of affordable housing. So, you know, I don't think we have the resources currently in place. You know, one of the things I was going to raise in my director comments is that I'd like for sort of APCHA, the city and the county, to kind of get together and figure out, like, what staffing do we need to leverage this money that's coming? Because I'm involved in these broader conversations at the state level, and some of it is going to be, you know, first out the door. So if you're poised to submit a grant, you know, you're the one that's going to get it, which I don't think is very equitable. But, you know, that is some of the conversation that's happening. And like I said, there is currently programs that could be leveraged. And, you know, so I would rather us envision where we think we need to go. I do think that we are going to have to commit to investment. We're at the point of sort of, you know, where we're being faced with the question, right? Like, how badly do we want to preserve it, and whose responsibility is it? And I think government is going to be part of that answer.
Thanks, Kelly. John, did you have thoughts on that?
I was going to tag on a little bit to Kelly's comment about continued investment into an affordable housing program, right? But most of our investment today has been directed towards building new. At some point, you've got to decide, we've built quite a bit, now we have to have some kind of number that we're going to use to take care of it and change that paradigm. You know, we had stuff to come back, a few months ago, where we were talking about shrinking the exclusionary zone. I get people want to create wealth from something, right? Maybe employee housing, affordable housing isn't where you go try to create a little, wealth from retirement, but not shrink the exclusionary zone. Grand Junction would be a great place to invest in rentals, as long as you had your nut covered in an affordable way here, right? So, I mean, I think it's to shift the paradigm completely and turn the thing on its head. So,
you know, there's a little bit of a parallel with open space and trails, where as the program started, it was really acquiring all these really important properties before they were developed, before they were sold, so on and so forth. But as the program matured, you got to a point where staff would say, we need more people on the ground maintaining the open space and taking care of the weeds. And, so that percentage of that tax was changed so that they could do more stewardship and management. And I think there's really no question we are moving into a stewardship mode. And that doesn't mean that anybody should get a free ride or they shouldn't, be participating based on their means and what our expectations being reasonable. I've been thinking of ideas of how do you keep those costs down? Like, what if we were able to contract with one carpet installer and distributor from the company and let people know, hey, if you go to the APCHA approved contracted carpet place, you'll get a 25% discount, because we're going to guarantee them volume. I mean, how else do we make it affordable for people to do the right thing and bring them into this? But I really agree with what both Kelly and John are saying.
Well, I'm going to jump in. I mean, Rachel, I think, there is need for that idea. It's hard to maintain your unit if you can't get a service call back, right? And I've been in that situation with, our bathtub, we've used the shower, whatever, but, it's weeks, so there may be some, I think, solution there to like have some kind of approved and what's the, when you put an attorney on
preferred
professional card
retainer, yeah, because there is some of that,
Yeah, no, it's gotten really bad.
It's going to be more difficult than you might think.
Yeah, well,
every contractor that I know is jammed. They're not going to take on small projects anymore. They're all maxed out. Every sub is in the same boat right now. You're going to have a very difficult time getting one person on board to perform these jobs.
I think, Rick, you're right just about trying to find a preferred contractor. I keep thinking about back. I did a Habitat for Humanity day down in Basalt, and I was talking to one of the construction guys and just asking him, how did you end up, because he was a paid employee, and just kind of how did you end up here? And talking to him, he said, look, I had my own company. He said, I was running up and down the valley all day long, running myself into the ground, trying to build, trying to stay on time. People needed rush jobs. And he said, it was just so much stress that he said, ultimately, I just decided I wanted less stress in my life. And so I moved into this role. And, so I sort of wonder, is there an opportunity for maybe APCHA to look at bringing someone on, and APCHA gets the materials and maybe contracts out to homeowners, to HOAs, and rather than providing a direct subsidy, maybe we provide the labor, and they pay for the materials. I'm just sort of thinking about ways to try and make this work. That might be a viable way forward. Because, the other thing, too, is exactly right. They can't get a call back because you're competing with all the free market stuff where they're paying, top rate plus we'll pay you extra if you get here pronto, So,
yeah.
Let me, and thank you. This is excellent conversation. And I want to make sure that we're in a place as staff to come back with something that's useful. And so I want to take the piece of, Kelly, you talked about incentives. Rachel, you talked about needing a model grant. John, you talked about investing, and also everyone at various points have talked about what's government's role and government's funding role. So I think there are two fundamental questions to start with, and the first one being, where does the board feel like the cost of those capital improvements about who should pay? And the reason I ask that is that if we say it all goes to the, I haven't heard anyone say it should all go to the into the price of the new house. Sorry,
well,
we just
today under the current system, in my opinion, under what we've got today, it's the seller. Under the system, under the rules of the game today, in my opinion, it should be the seller. Now, changing a deed restriction, doing something else, moving forward, getting them to pay some of it, we pay. It's a program. honestly, you probably, depending on what we do, you might get people that come to you and go, I like this new program. I've got this, this, and this, and this I need to do. I can't afford it. Can you help? And then, you know, that becomes, well, sign a new deed restriction, and we'll work something, you know, we'll match our new program, whatever that is at the time.
So based on what John just said, let me call the question of, should the seller pay something, recognizing that some sellers, and what I heard from staff was, if a majority of sellers are keeping up with the capital improvements on their property, then functionally they are paying that now. And so the question isn't, should the seller pay everything? Should the seller pay something, recognizing that we don't want sellers to lose their shirts? That's what I've heard.
Yes.
Yes, and can I make a comment, Diane? I know you're trying to narrow it down, but I think that at some point we need to kind of look at the fact that the construction, it's like the interstate highway. The federal government constructed it to begin with. They paid 90% of the cost. States paid 10% of the cost. And then they turned it over to the states and said, there, now you have maintenance and responsibility to rebuild 100% of it. And we don't have that money. And what we've done is we've subsidized a unit, and the government paid for 1/3 of it. I mean, we literally, we may have given it away, but we paid for that 1/3 of it. And we're now asking the homeowner to take responsibility for 100% of it. So it's kind of like the government put its money in to make something and then pulled out all responsibility for keeping it up and said it's going to go on to the homeowner. And I think that just has to be acknowledged in here at some level, because we've got that as the base nut of what the asset is to be kept up. And then we have a low-income person we've sold it to, and we've told them they have limited appreciation, but they are obligated to keep up the 100%. And I just think that's where we're going to end up needing some government money to fill that gap, because we've created a structural deficit.
And Rachel, thank you. That was my second question, right? Is that I've heard from at least 3 of you that there is some money from the outside that's needed. And I want to be really careful not to say we'll get it from the new infrastructure, because it's just an unknown. Kelly, I think you're right. Number one, we don't have the capacity and the bandwidth at APCHA nor the expertise to go out and get that money. Number two, it is part of the reason why officials are on the board is specifically in your liaison role. So that is the next question. And Rachel, it is narrowing, but it's trying to get some statements that we can build things around. So statement number 1 is sellers should pay something, but shouldn't lose their shirts, right? That's a good general statement. I think that next one that I'm hearing from you, and I want to check with the rest of the board, is should the city and county be asked for some type of contribution? And I'm saying some type. It may be staff help. It may be full-on real dollars. And love to hear thoughts on that.
Well, I think I said it earlier, but I think, that transfer tax, the 1%, that should have paid for APCHA, and that should pay for any dollars that get spent, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's a huge pool of money. You guys I saw the article in the paper. I didn't actually read it, but you guys are having discussions on that. But to me, that is the logical source of those funds. It was created for housing and other things. But to me, that's where we go back to do we continue to build more, or do we just take care of what we got?
Good question.
Rachel, you've got your hand up?
No, it's an old hand, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Kelly, didn't you say that there's some significant money, federal money, that's going to become available in the $20 million range? Is that what I heard.
Wasn't there a PPP loan for housing? Oh wait, that was a bad joke.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, you know, the funding for the housing funding landscape is, you know, broad. I mean, there's been a commitment at the state level for $40 million over 3 to 4 years that hasn't been leveraged yet, and that's just state money. Then there's $90 million that is coming through from the state stimulus because they did better than they thought. And then there's $267 million directly being allocated to housing from the American Rescue Plan. And then the state's getting $4 billion from the American Rescue Plan, to which, you know, the legislature will decide how to spend it in concert with the governor's priorities. And housing is, you know, one of the high topics of conversation. And that could be solving homelessness. You know, there's a lot in the housing bucket, right? But, you know, I don't think I'm stepping out of bounds to say, like, there is money coming in the pipeline for housing. I don't think we're poised to take best advantage of it. I think we have a lot of success locally on drawing down state level grants, et cetera. I'm just not sure that we continue to have capacities right now to really go after it. I think in a, you know, strategic and aggressive manner. That's my opinion.
Yeah. You know, just on that question from the city side, I would greatly enjoy a discussion about how to staff APCHA up. And I think that when we particularly get a new director, that's going to be one of the first things they tell us. You know, it's not uncommon to see agencies really try to keep it mean and lean, especially when the county has to contribute from their general fund and the city has ample funds going forward. But John and others have hit on the real nut, and that is that every dollar we spend somewhere else seems to be coming out of production. And people know how bad the shortages of housing and valley-wide, everything like that. But, you know, a new staff position fully paid up and insurance and everything, you know, you're going to be talking about $100,000 or more a year. 2 positions, you're $200,000 a year. Somebody's going to say that's $2 million over 10 years. Like, not going to go into housing. And, you know, it's always that balance. But I fully agree with you. I think, there's no way that we can ask the community for new resources until the problems of the current program are fixed, whether it's asking more from the county or anyone else. You can't ask more until they say, how are you using the monies now and how have you fixed the problems? The other things that are out there, John, and it's been discussed publicly, is there are expiring deed restrictions on a lot of our rental projects, and that could take pretty much a huge chunk of everything we have left. And I've really asked that, you know, kind of after we finish what we're committed to with the new housing at Burlingame, that, you know, we really need to take a little bit of a pause to say, how do we allocate these resources towards the current problems? As much as I want new production, I just can't keep running down this road and not seeing it. And you know, one of the things we're seeing that the lumberyard project would be of such magnitude money-wise, you can't even imagine it. And so, okay, we're going to have to cut back so we don't have to do underground parking. And now they're cutting back the density. So everyone's saying, you know, more and more density is getting upset with that. There are only so many dollars when you really divide them out. They're you know, allocated towards buying down deed restrictions, settling some lawsuits we have with Centennial and Burlingame and others. It's not an endless pot. And there's a little fear that the red itself is going to be kind of cannibalized because there's so little inventory to sell next year and the year after that it's all coming in one big chunk. So anyhow, I do think there's public money, and I think it should be spent on the things that get us to where we need to be. And for me, one of those things is APCHA staffing. We don't have a long-range planner position. We barely have any sort of integration with ComDev and planning and zoning. And we don't have, you know, we barely can get away from the daily caseload to take a big look at these pictures, as John or others were saying, of, you know, do we need to make it out of whole cloth? Does it really need to be revised to be both fair, equitable, and self-sustaining? And that's what we're shooting for. We're looking at GMQS right now, which has been a legacy program for over 30 years, the growth management quota system, but nobody's using it anymore. They've created so many exemptions, and it's not measuring growth anymore, and it's not controlling growth anymore. But we've had to say we need to look at almost a total rewrite, if not a halfway total rewrite, for that to have any meaning anymore. And we're just living on a legacy program that had flaws in it, and those flaws have become apparent. And it will probably take money to fix it.
Three quick things. One is, thank you, Rachel. I think the government money question is a good one. My recommendation in general on that front is, if you're going to go after grants, plan to use other money and then backfill that. Basically, take a loan from the city and county and then backfill it with grants if you get the grant. If we move forward with just an assumption that we're going to hire a grants person and they're going to go out and get money, we will not get this done. Right? That's my advice on that front. I do want to recognize that it's we're already leaking into board comment time, and I want to respect that. And some of our staff, this is coming up on hour 12 of their workday, so I also want to respect that. I think that my third piece of the first piece was sellers should pay something, but shouldn't lose their shirts. There may be a government woman, and I would encourage our electeds to go back and talk to their peers about what are the opportunities for that? Is that something real, and what would be the process by which we would make that a reality? And then the third piece that I will bring back is in those properties where they really need a lot of capital improvements, do we include something in increasing the sales price? Right, we don't want to put ourselves out of the market, but we may need to look at that. So I think I have enough to bring back a couple models to the next meeting. And so with that, Carson, I'll hand it back to you, and either taking closing comments or moving into board comments. Thank you. This was excellent discussion. I really appreciate the direction on. We will bring back to the board the updated regulations. It may take us a couple meetings, but we'll do that as quickly as possible. And then we are started today in earnest on the updated deed restriction, and we'll get to work on that right away as well. So thank you for that too.
Great. I guess my closing comments would just be thank you to everybody. This is a very, very, very complex problem, and appreciate everyone's expertise. So let's go ahead and move into board comments. Rachel, go ahead. You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm going to say thank you very much for everyone for tolerating all the comments I've already made. I don't have anything new, except I will be missing the next APCHA meeting. But I think Skippy will be back. Thank you.
Yep. David, go ahead.
I guess my comment would be to kind of circle back on the discussion we've just been having. I loved Kelly's idea about incentives. And it occurred to me that perhaps the incentive would be that if you have a capital improvement that needs to be done that you can't afford, we loan the money to the homeowner. The homeowner can make the repair. The homeowner pays only interest during the period that they live there. The nut is added to the back end, so it's paid for by the buyer, and APCHA or the government, whoever it is paid back for that loan. In the meantime, the homeowner only has to pay the interest and doesn't have to come up with the $10,000 or $20,000 to replace a roof, whatever that might be. That seemed to me like a fairly good way to perhaps keep the inventory up to stuff. That's all I've got to say.
Thanks, David. Anyone else with comments? Nope. All right. Well, then I will take a motion to adjourn from John Ward.
A motion to adjourn the meeting this evening.
I will second.
Rachel seconds. Cindy, go ahead.
Okay. Rick?
You don't have to do that as a roll call. You can just do ayes and nays on that one, can't you?
No, you really
I think we
got to
do it for everything.
Yeah.
It's because of the Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Rick?
To that?
Rachel?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Yes.
Carson?
Yes.
John?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, appreciate you all.
Thanks,
Happy
everyone.
Mayo, you guys.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank
Good
you.
travel.
Go have a tortilla.